Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. Before I talk about the Lune Hatchery, there's just a couple of things I would like to say. First of all, in answer to what you were saying, I think the big problem is not convincing the vast majority of people that stocking can be beneficial. It's the people who seem to be at the top of the food chain, who hold the whip hand, who make the serious decisions, who need convincing.
Not the people that are advising them.
Absolutely not. And I think you asked a question before, why is it that in some parts of the country hatcheries have been closed down, as for example in Wales, but in other parts of the country, as on the Lune, we're allowed to carry on? Yep. I would say there are two reasons for that. And I can only speak for the Lune here. On the Lune, I think that we've been lucky, and maybe lucky isn't quite the right word, but we've been, well, use whatever word you want, fortunate in that a succession of fishery officers have listened to what we had to say. They've been reasonable people, and providing, in their view, we didn't overdo things in terms of the number of eggs that we were taking, they allowed us to continue. So that's one reason why we've been allowed to carry on the Lune. The other reason, I think, why we've carried on the Lune is down to belligerence, because we've had a couple of fishery officers who didn't like what we were doing at all, whether they got the nod from the higher-ups down in Bristol saying, what's going on the Lune, you need to sort these lads out, they should not be doing this. And I am the least belligerent bloke you will ever meet, unless I really need to be. And when threatening sounds were made about the Lune Hatchery, you know, we're thinking that you've had your day and it's time that we shut you down, basically I said, right, okay, you shut us down, you'll be sick of the sight of my name. You will hear me on Look North West, you'll hear me on Radio Lancashire, I'll get on to my MP, and I did get on to my MP a couple of times when we were threatened, and there's absolutely no question at all that within the Environment Agency, they do not like bad publicity. They don't like people like MPs getting onto them. And as soon as that was done, immediately, Vic, we need to sit down and we need to talk about your stocking business. And in the end, we were allowed to carry on. Over the years, the number of eggs that we've been allowed to take has been whittled down, but I think that's why we've survived as long as we have, because we took over the hatchery on the Lune in 1997. I'll say more about that in the next few minutes. I do detect, I have to say, I've not had this officially, as I'm sure that nobody has, but I do detect within the Environment Agency a bit of a softening of attitude towards stocking, in that they don't seem to be trying to bureaucratise us out of what we're doing. We're not getting so much of the, how can you justify this, how are you going to monitor that? And some of these things, certainly given the...
Sorry, I feel like a director in a play. If you present to that screen, it's just about, I'm sorry to disturb, it's just about the live stream.
It's perfect, all right.
There you go.
Yeah, you know, basically keeping raising the bar. What we do with the Environment Agency on the Lune, we do what I call a 3-year deal. For about the first 12 years that we were operating, it was a year-on-year meeting or series of meetings that we had to have with the Environment Agency, whereby we agreed the number of eggs, what stage in the life cycle we were going to take them on to. And these things, you know how bureaucratic the Environment Agency are. These meetings went on to the point that when you finally reached agreement, it was almost time to restart the cycle for the following year. So in the end I said, look, can we sort something out a little bit more long term? So we do these 3-year deals with them where we agree those sort of parameters. Now, I think it was 2 years ago, wasn't it, Andy, when we had the last meeting. Andy and myself went into this meeting almost expecting the worst, because there was a big pile-up on the motorway, wasn't it? You were late for that meeting. I was a bit late, but there were 2 fishery officers that were there. And as we walked down to the meeting room, one of them said to me, I mustn't mention names really, but Joe Soap's here at this meeting, and Joe Soap is almost within the Environment Agency, certainly in our region, the high priest of anti-stocking. And I thought, well, if he's here, I know what he's come for. He's come to deliver the coup de grace, and we're going to be told that that's it, you've reached the end of the line. Now, in this meeting, nothing could have been further from the truth. And as I was presenting what we wanted to go on and do, there was just no questions that were raised or anything. They agreed to everything that we proposed. This had never happened before in nearly 30 years. And we came out at the end and went on the car park and said, did that really happen? You know, have we actually got the green light for 3 more years? So, given the nature of this guy that was at that meeting, you know, very, very anti-stocking, he's been, certainly for about 25 years, telling me what a great job we are doing of buggering up the genetics and everything of Lune salmon. All of a sudden, there's this lack of challenge. So I do suspect that there is a softening of attitude. I hope I'm right, and maybe I'm completely wrong.
So just ask when was that meeting?
That meeting was about 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, enough of that sort of thing. I'll talk because I know that the clock's ticking up. Sorry. Yeah. We're over here. Yeah. The history of the Lune Hatchery, as you can see over there, it was actually built in 1951, and it was a collaborative effort between the then newly formed Lune and Wire Fishery Association, the consultative for the Lune and the neighbouring much smaller River Wire, and the equally newly formed Lancashire River Board. And we were very fortunate in Lancashire in that the fisheries division of the Lancashire River Board was headed by a fellow called Leslie Stewart. And Leslie Stewart was one of these, the sort of fellow that we could do with now really, a short, stocky guy, but whenever you saw him, and I remember him, I'm going back now to the late 50s and through the 60s, so I was seeing him as a kid, but he just had this air of industry about him. You know, he was one of those people that always seemed to be on a mission. And he had a very clear vision for what he wanted to do for the River Lune. And one of the things that he did was to take over... I'm moving out of position again, aren't I? Can you go on to the next one, Brian, please? Yeah, the weir at Broad Rain. Here we are. This is Broad Rain Weir. This is on the Upper Lune. Going back probably 200 years, this was a natural waterfall. The bedrock in that area is very, very slaty. And then somebody decided just... yeah, just out of shock. I used to be a school teacher at one time.
There are some environment agency people here.
Are there really?
So you can tell.
I'll see them later. Just down here, there was a corn mill that was built. And so the face of that waterfall was smoothed off using concrete. And again, out of shot over here, there was all the mechanism, the sluices and so on, that ran water down to power this corn mill. The corn mill closed down in the 1940s. And Leslie Stewart, being the on-the-ball sort of proactive fellow that he was, he arranged for the Lancashire River Board to buy the site and built this fish pass that you can see here. Now, at the time this photograph was taken over 20 years ago, because the site has very much changed, as I'll explain in a minute or two, the fish had to jump in to the fish pass. But that's a time of very high water. You can see there's probably, maybe 12 inches that the fish have got to jump into. Under normal flows, that would be a drop of about 3 to 4 feet. So the fish did, have to make quite an effort to get in there. But having said that, to salmon, there's quite a depth of water below that. When you watch the fish go in, it was just like watching a racehorse or a greyhound. There was absolutely no problem at all, as long as they were heading in the right direction. Now, with this, the fish pass goes up, and at the far end of it, if we go on to the next slide, this is the way things are now. We'll go back to the other slide in a minute or two, because a hydro has been built on that weir, which has it's messed things up for us a little bit really in a couple of ways, but the fish pass has been completely altered. That's the modern fish pass, and it's one of these Lurinia fish passes. The benefit of that is that the fish no longer have to jump into it. So when the water gets very cold in December, when fish previously were reluctant to make that sort of 3 to 4 feet leap, now they can just swim straight in. But the downside of it, can we go back to the previous slide? downside of it is that the site of the hydro is just here, and it's effectively diverted the current onto the far side. So the current comes round here, and the fish tend to follow, as salmon do, they tend to follow that current. So they make for the far side of the weir. And one of the conditions for getting planning permission for the hydro was that they had to put a notch, as they called it, effectively a lowering of the weir over on the far side, which again increased the flow of water down there. And there's absolutely no question that the fish do naturally make for that, and effectively they are led away from our fish pass. So that's at Broad Rain, that's where we've got the fish pass, the fish trap, and here we are. So this is the Lune fish pass. There's an underground trapping chamber, which is basically a square room that's, I would estimate, about 8 feet square, something like that. And to actually trap the fish, they swim up here, they swim up the pass, and they swim through a thing that's called an in-scale, which is it's a funny thing to describe. Have we got that slide, Brian? It's got the in-scale on. This is the in-scale here. It's made from 3/8 steel bar. It'll be about 2 feet 6 square, and it fits into this slot. There are 2 pieces of channel steel that go down there, and this just lifts up and drops in. It's effectively a square funnel, if you've got to use your imagination a bit here, but it's a square funnel, and in the front of this funnel, instead of the tube that you get in a normal funnel that perhaps you used to put, you know, liquid in your mower or something like that, there is a rectangular slot. And the idea is that the fish, this is the fish pass, the fish swim up here, they swim through this in-scale, through the rectangular slot at the front, they're now in the trap chamber and they can't find the way out. So it's very, very simple, it's very, very effective. We've just got one problem on the Lune, and that is that the upper middle Lune Valley and the upper Lune Valley is very heavily wooded. So at the time that we are collecting brood stock, November and December time, unless the river drops away, it's almost like minestrone soup. It's just absolutely full of leaves. And the leaves, as you can imagine, they cut the in-scale. So you finish up that the only water going out is going out through this rectangular slot. And the fish have this uncanny knack of being able to follow the current, and so they swim in, swim around a time or two, and then they swim out. In the days when the riverboard were running the trap, which they did for over 40 years, they would have a team there 7 days a week from dawn till dusk, and every hour or so when the thing was bunged up with leaves, they'd just turn the water off. The water flow is controlled by a couple of sluices, so they just shut the sluice off, clear the leaves off, and away they went again. Nowadays, we are just running this with teams of volunteers, and people have other things to do with the time, basically. So they'll go up in the morning, take any fish out of the trap, transfer them to the holding pens, refit the in-scale, and then the next team come the following day. So it doesn't work as effectively as it used to do. If the upper Lune Valley was treeless, the whole operation would be so much more effective and so much simpler. In the days that the River Authority and their successors, so there was, initially it was the Lancashire River Board, then it was the Lancashire River Authority, and then North West Water that ran it, and in the very last days it had, North West Water had transferred responsibility for fisheries to the newly formed NRA, and that's who we started dealing with when we were going through the business of taking it on. So that's a little bit about that and how that works. The other part of the operation is the actual hatchery itself, which is physically a completely different setup. It's about, as the crow flies, probably about 2 miles away from the trap and the holding pens. I didn't mention the holding pens, did I? Because just, in fact, here we are. Most of the brood stock that we catch, and I'm sure this will be the same with other operations, when we catch the fish, they're not ripe. They might be as coloured as anything, and one of the things that we learned very quickly was that the colour of a fish is absolutely no indication whatsoever to its ripeness. you know, you'll get hen fish that are as black as the ace of spades. You think, what a cracker, she will go now. Oh no, she won't. She might do. And equally, we get silver fish, which have probably not been out of the sea more than 2 or 3 days, particularly once you get into December. You pick them up and the eggs are running as freely as you like. So these holding pens are a very valuable and almost indispensable addition to the operation, because we get the fish out of the trap, we put them in the pens until such time as they are ready to string. So that's that. Now, if I can just have a look at these while I'm talking about the colour of the fish. When we started and we were sort of naive and basically knew nothing, we think they're the sort of fish that we want to have, fish which are like that. But equally, look at that fish. That's a silver fish, but it's completely graphic. So as I say, the colour of the fish really, in our experience, is no guide whatsoever to whether they'll strip or they won't. Moving on to the hatchery. This is the actual hatchery building. It's the site of an old sawmill, a water-powered sawmill which fell into disuse in the 1930s or 40s. You can see from the type of cows which are there, this photo was taken quite a long time ago. But this is the stream that we take the water supply from. It comes off the Middleton Fells, so it's all completely natural. It's at the ambient temperature and so on. And through the sea, we've got some settlement tanks up here. There they are. There's a much younger me sort of directing operations, and these are the settling tanks, so that any sediment in the water just settles down to the bottom. We use Hessian sacking material there as a filter to get rid of any sediment that was carried in the water. The sediment wasn't a big problem, but it does tend to settle on the eggs in the hatchery, which is a nuisance, so that did help to avoid that. And this is the inside of the hatchery itself. You can see there's some baskets of eggs there. The capacity of the hatchery is actually 2 million eggs. I don't think the 2 million eggs have ever been laid down. But for the period, for the 40 years or thereabouts that the different authorities were running the hatchery, the average between 700,000 and about 1.3 million eggs. So it was quite a substantial operation. What they couldn't do, given these facilities, was to take the young salmon beyond fed-fry stage, because they simply didn't have the space. When we took it on in 1997, we did go that stage further. So what they used to do was to put about 1/3 of the eggs that they'd got out as green over in specially prepared reds. And they experimented, this was Leslie Stewart again, experimented with different sorts of reds. There was a photo with an earlier presenter of eggs being tipped down at Vibe. All that sort of thing was done in the 50s and the 60s on the Lune. A further 1/3 of them, so we're talking about hundreds of thousands of fish here, went out as unfed fry, and then the remaining 1/3 went on to the fed fry stage, and they were put out, dependent on water conditions, in late June or July. And they were fed on very finely minced liver. And apparently in the summer, the smell of this liver, when it had been in there for 3 or 4 days, was enough to knock a horse off his feet. Apparently it's absolutely dreadful. But the fish used to really go for it. When we were doing this, we just used a commercially based fish food. So the days of the liver were gone. In 1994, the then NRA decided that they were going to mothball the hatchery. I was very alarmed. I was equally alarmed at the lack of alarm that a lot of other people showed. It was, a lot of people said, oh, well, let's see what happens. Yeah, and if there's a bit of a disaster, where do we go? Oh, well, we can always restart it. Well, things aren't as simple as that. And I was particularly concerned at the trap that things like the sluices and a lot of the mechanism, which tremendously costly equipment, wouldn't be maintained properly. So 4 or 5 years down the line, well, maybe the hatchery was a good idea, let's go and restart it, or everything's seized up. The cost of restarting it really would have been prohibitive. There's absolutely no question about that. So when I got involved and started making a bit of a song and dance about this, my initial aim really was just to keep things in working conditions so that if there was a change of policy, everything would be in good working order, ready to start up again. In actual fact, we went a little bit better than that. And I was supported, I must say, that there's probably two people on the Lune and with the Lune Hatchery who are almost inextricably linked with the history of it. One is Dr. Leslie Stewart, who I mentioned before, who was responsible for its construction. And the other is a guy who laboured under the rather grand title of the Salmon Fisheries Inspector for the Lune, which really was a fancy title for the head bailiff. And that was a fellow called Peter Horner. Peter was a bachelor. He was basically married to the River Lune and all who swam in her, I suppose, really. But his knowledge of the Lune catchment and the habits of the fish was nothing short of encyclopedic. And he was a big believer in the effectiveness of the hatchery. And when he heard, he was appalled by this decision to mothball it, and when he heard that I was keen to sort of get involved and potentially take the thing on, he was tremendously supportive of me, and he taught me a great deal. He was a really, again, the sort of bloke that we could do with nothing about nowadays, but I don't think he would get into the sort of the level of seniority that he did, particularly if he knew that he was pro-stocking. So, in 94, 95, Peter and I sort of went here, there and everywhere. He basically showed me the ropes. And in 1997, after lots of meetings with during the time that all these negotiations were going on, the NRA turned into the EA. You're dealing with the same people and all the rest of it, just have different badges on the sweatshirts and that. They were happy that we took it on, subject to certain agreements being made. I spoke to Peter about the fact that the furthest stage in the life cycle that the agency had ever taken the fish was fed fry. I said, you know, what could we do about taking them further on? What could we do about taking them to autumn par stage or pre-smolt stage? And knowing the sort of fellow that Peter was, he wasn't one that, he didn't take any prisoners, let's put it that way. And most of the questions that I asked him about why do you do this, why do you do that, why do you do it like that, and all the rest of it, if there wasn't a ready answer, it was a case of, look, Vic, we've been doing this for a long, long time. Don't you come along here with your newfangled fancy ideas and start telling us what to do. That's how it is. Okay, Peter. So I didn't expect him to show any enthusiasm for this suggestion that we could perhaps take the fish on to a further stage. And he was 100% behind it. He thought it was an excellent idea. And even better, he said, I think, because we couldn't do it ourselves, we just didn't have the space, we didn't have tanks and so on. I think I know a place where you may be able to get this done, possibly at reasonable cost, but that's down to you. So he took me to meet a couple of sheep farmers who farmed up Garsdale, which is one of the more remote Yorkshire dales. As I say, they were sheep farmers, but in an attempt to diversify, they put two 13-foot diameter tanks into a shippen, and they were producing smolts for the sea cages off the Scottish coast. Now, as the salmon farming industry grew, the salmon farmers wanted increasing numbers of smolts, and what Austin and Lindsay could produce was a fairly limited number, so they were effectively going out of business. So I went up there with Peter one evening, we sat down, we talked about what we wanted to do, we talked money. I'd been told by a number of experts at the agency and other organisations that you can't produce pre-smolts for less than £2. And we wanted to produce a minimum of 25,000 pre-smolts. £50,000, absolutely, we couldn't afford that, you know, it was an absolute non-starter. So we sat down with them, I never mentioned this £2 per smolt or anything like that, and we agreed that they were prepared to take on the running of the hatchery. Once we'd done the last stripping, they would go to the hatchery every day, take out any dead eggs, any white eggs, check the water flow, just make sure that basically everything was ship shape and Bristol fashion. When they override, they would take them up to their farm, they would grade them in the July. The smallest fish, they would put them out as fed fry. They would grade them again at the end of September. The smaller 25,000 would go out as autumn par. The remaining 25,000 they would take on to pre-smolt stage. And for that, we did a deal and it was £15,000, which I think was pretty reasonable. A few years down the line, when our fundraising efforts started to flag a little bit, I'd agreed with them that I would never say, right, we'll start another cycle unless I can guarantee payment to you. And we reached the point where I couldn't guarantee that we'd have £15,000 in the kitty. So we sat down over a cup of tea and a bun, and we agreed a new deal where we got exactly the same for £10,000. Which was a better deal. Did make me feel slightly ripped off for the previous 5 years. But you can't win them all. So basically, going back a little bit, we took our first eggs in the autumn of 1997. The fed fry went out in the summer of 1998. The autumn par went out in the autumn of 1998. And the pre-smolts, most of which turned out not to be pre-smolts in actual fact, but obviously we're talking 1+ smolts here. Virtually all Lune smolts certainly go down to sea as 2+. So with hindsight, it wasn't surprising that most of them didn't grow very much over the winter. But I would say that out of the 25,000-ish supposed pre-smolts, we probably had 6,000 or 7,000 that would have actually smolted in the spring of 1997. We looked for a site for a smolt pond. We found 2 possible sites, one on the upper Lune, but access was no good, so we didn't bother with that one. But we found another one which was effectively a small backwater on the lower Lune. We could net it to keep out goose standers and the like, and we put the fish in there and we continued to feed them. A big flood eventually took them away, along with the clockwork feeders. But what that meant was that our first returning adults could be expected in the year 2000. The agency insisted that we fin clipped them. Now, I didn't want to do that. I just thought, no, we'll have confidence in what we're doing. We'll assume that some of these fish are coming back. I don't like the idea of cutting bits and pieces off. In my rather unscientific way, I don't think it's going to do anything to enhance their chances of survival. But the agency insisted that we've got to do a certain amount of monitoring, so we've got to fin clip the fish. And there's a photo there in the ship and up where we had the 2 tanks up at Austin and Lindsay's. We anaesthetised them using a solution of benzocaine, and there were about a dozen of us there that spent a very happy and very cold Saturday clipping the adipose fins off these fish. We moved them all into one tank, netted some of them out, anaesthetised them, cut the adipose fins off, and then dropped them into the other tank. Austin said to me, I'll ring you, because obviously the fish take a while to come round, I'll ring you tomorrow and tell you how many of these fish you've lost. So with a certain amount of trepidation, the phone rang Sunday morning, I picked the phone up. How many fish do you think we've lost? Austin, just tell me, don't mess about. We didn't lose a single fish, which is remarkable. And over the years that we were fin clipping, and later fin clipping and microtagging, we lost a handful of fish. It was, I'm not saying that to show off, but you know, given that we were a bunch of amateurs, I think it was quite remarkable. So they went out into the smolt pond, as I say, some of them headed off to sea in 1999. In 2000, I got onto all the different associations on the river. I spoke to the netsman about so important that you examine every fish for a missing adipose fin. And a couple of people have alluded to the fact today that there is an underreporting of fin-clipped adults, and I would agree 100% with that. Just as one example, I mean, if I had £1 for every angler who caught a fish, put it back in, and said, Vic, I forgot to look, You know, all the time I was playing the fish, I was thinking, when I get it out, I must have a look for that missing fin. But I suppose in the heat of the moment, you get the fish out, you know, you want to unhook it, get it back in. Even though we're going back over 20 years, most of the fish were returned, not all of them. But in 2008, I was fishing a pool called Lawsonwood Stream, and everyone touches the Lune knows that it was one of our best pools. I got a grill, 6.5 pound, a beautifully shaped fish, knocked it on the head, shame, put it in the fishing hole, went back in to continue fishing this pool. 3 of the lads rolled up, I was fishing away in quite fast water, so I couldn't hear what they were saying, all the arm waving and excitement on the bank. When I went out, the fish that I caught was a fin-clipped fish. I'd not examined it, you know, me of all people. You know, this business of I forgot to look, I do understand it completely. Going back to 2000, everybody's on the lookout for fin-clipped fish. I came home from work one day, early September 2000, 3 messages on the answer phone. Vic, we've got one of your fish. They're not my fish at all, obviously, but that's what some people call them. At the time, and you'll probably remember this, on the back of your salmon licence there was a drawing of a fin-clipped fish. See, if you notice a fish with the adipose fin missing, this is what you do. Cut the head off, put it in the freezer, ring this number, somebody will come and collect the head and they will test it for the presence of a microtag. Bear in mind, we weren't microtagging the fish at this time. The guy that caught the fish, again I won't mention any names, but the lure of a £20 reward was considerable with this guy. So even though he knew that we didn't microtag the fish, the head was duly cut off, put in his freezer, collected by the Environment Agency. A few days later they phoned him and the fish had come from the River Liffey in Ireland. So much for genetic integrity, you know, because salmon always go back to their natal river, don't they? So well, that was quite a disappointment really, because as you can imagine, all of us that were involved in this project, we were pretty euphoric that at least one salmon had come back. But we needn't to worry, because over the next 2 or 3 weeks, 2 more fin-clipped fish were caught on the rod. And then when we started trapping at Broad Rain in November, 1 fin-clipped fish was caught. A few days later there were 2 in the trap, and a few days after that there was another one. And in 2000 we trapped a total of 20 fish at Broad Rain, and 4 of them were fin-clipped. Now bear in mind, this is from really a handful of 1+ smolts. We couldn't prove categorically that they were our fish because they'd not been microtagged, but we knew they were really. And each year subsequent to that, fish were caught in the nets, they were caught on the rod, odd kelps were caught, they were caught on the rod, or they were found dead. So there was absolutely no question in our mind that we were doing some good. And this was obviously from a fairly small proportion of the fish that we were dealing with.
Have you moved it?
I'm sorry, I do apologise. I took for no publicity actually, that's what it is. Now, after 4 years of this, a little bit like you lads on the Ewer, the Environment Agency became increasingly sceptical about our results. You know, how do you know that these are your fish? And they wanted us to microtag them as well as fin-clip them. Again, I was against it. I'm not a biologist, but as I understand it, part of the mechanism for salmon migrating back from the feeding grounds to the natal river uses the Earth's magnetic field. So, you know, if you want to sort of mess things up for the salmon, why not put a piece of metal in its nose? But anyway, again, they were insistent, and it did at least confirm that fish that we were catching, and not just fish that we were catching on the Lune, but fin-clipped fish that were caught on other rivers, neighbouring rivers. The furthest travelled straggler that we got, which was a microtagged fin-clipped Lune fish, was an 11-pounder that was caught in the Welsh Dee. And you know, there was no getting away from that. It had our microtag, so we knew it was one of our fish. I did write actually to the captor of the fish. I was given his name and address to congratulate him on catching this fish. and also to say I do hope you appreciate the efforts that we're making on the Lune to stop your river. I didn't get a reply from him, but maybe that's the Welsh for you, I don't know. I'm conscious of the time, I need to...
You're okay, another 5 minutes.
Am I okay? Another 5 minutes, right. Where shall we go?
Times have gone all right.
Yeah, over the years, the first big change that impacted us was that in one of our meetings, one of our 3-year deal meetings, we were told that we weren't allowed to produce pre-smolts anymore, and the reason was that you're affecting the behaviour of these fish, which I don't know. A couple of years later, we were stopped from putting pre-smolts, putting autumn par out. So we were just putting fed fry and over out into the river. And then, I think it was 8 years ago, yeah, that sounds about right, we were told that we weren't allowed to put any fry out at all. So everything that we put out now is put out in Scotty boxes. We're allowed 35,000 eggs. Having taken an average of, this is in the time of our operation, having taken an average of between 80,000 and about 110,000 a year. The most we ever took was 146,000. But in all honesty, that was too many. That particular year, I think they were overcrowded. We got quite a lot of pinheads. And that was the only time that we had that problem. So, and you've got to be responsible. It's not a numbers game, is it really? It's not a case of get as many as we can so that we can show what a wonderful job we're doing. And I think that for us, for our facilities, about 100,000 was probably about right. I don't know how much you know about Scotty boxes, but they are the plastic boxes with 200 compartments in that you put eggs in. To load them, you don't put them in individually, you're there for the rest of your life. But there's a plate there, and we found that a dustpan is the ideal tool to scoop some eggs up, put them onto that loading plate, and just smooth them off. And then basically, this is half a Scotty box. You put them on the top, turn them upside down, give them a tap, and they drop in. Then you bolt two halves together and place them in the gravel. Going back a lot of years to the Lancashire River Board, in the very late 50s and early 60s, when they did research into the efficiency of reds, there were two things that came out that were very, very clear. And it was completely the opposite to what I would have expected, I'll be honest. The first thing was that the later the eggs were laid, the better. So eggs that were laid in November and December didn't survive particularly well. And also, the more shallowly they were laid, the better. And it was all down to siltation. Siltation was a big problem. So the deeper the eggs were, the longer they were there in the gravel, the greater the opportunities for siltation, starvation of oxygen because the water wasn't flowing through, and so on. And that was quite reassuring, really, because the way that we placed the Scotty boxes, which is just under the gravel, you know about Scotty boxes, does meet that criteria. You know, we're putting them out at the end of February, maybe early March, so we're putting them out late in the year, and we're just putting them with a very thin covering of gravel. The bad news is the last couple of years we've really struggled to get broodstock. In fact, for the last 2 years we've not caught any broodstock at all. There's been a collapse, a clear collapse in the salmon population on the Lune. We obviously catch a small proportion of the fish that take broad rain weir, plus the building of the hydro, which hasn't helped things. I'm not laying the blame at their feet, but it certainly hasn't helped. What the River Board used to do, going back years, if they were struggling to catch fish, if conditions were such that the fish weren't really moving, they used to put large boards on the top of the weir to stop them taking the far side, as I pointed out before. And the only other route upstream is to go through the fish pass, and apparently it worked very well. So I got some 72 large boards made last year, and we were going to put those in place in a time of low water. And unfortunately I wasn't so well last year. I was out of action for quite a long time, so that those boards were never put in place, but this year they most certainly will. and I hope that that will deflect enough salmon into the fish pass to give us the 35,000 eggs that we need, but only time will tell. At 10 to 4, I'll knock it on the head there, and I'll sit down. If anybody wants to ask any questions, do fire away.
Can I just add that this reference on here? Hi everybody. If anybody wants to know more about the Scotchy boxes and the process of in-stream incubation, that first link is really worth this podcast.